Namaste, everyone, and a very warm welcome to each one of you, and especially to our eminent speaker of today's webinar talk series. So, before we go ahead, let's have Dev's full geet.
प्रस्तुत है वेव्स कुलगीत।
पुराणों स्मृति ग्रंथों में निहित अमूल्य सार हम जाने, तत्व ज्ञान ही बोध हमारा, वेदाध्ययन है लक्ष्य हमारा। दशकों से है वेव्स दे रहा अवसर चर्चा का, चिंतन का।
दशकों से है वेव्स दे रहा अवसर चर्चा का, चिंतन का।
एक मंच पर सबको लाना ध्येय रहा हर सम्मेलन का, वैश्विक हित कर्तव्य हमारा, वेदाध्ययन है लक्ष्य हमारा।
ऋतं भरा प्रज्ञा से उतरूं, ऋतं भरा प्रज्ञा से उतरूं, भ्रमजालों से दूर बचे हम।
स्वस्थि भाव पूरित जीवन हो, अनृत मार्ग से दूर रहे हम, चिदानंद गंतव्य हमारा, वेदाध्ययन है लक्ष्य हमारा।
वेव्स है माध्यम जिसका न्यारा,
वेदाध्ययन है, वेदाध्ययन है, वेदाध्ययन है लक्ष्य हमारा।
So, this is Waves, and we are here and Waves webinar. So, this is the journey from since beginning, and it was started in the year 1996. So, again, I welcome you all. So we are here today for WAVE's webinar series, talk number 17. WAVE's webinar series is a joint initiative by the World Association for Vedic Studies USA, also known as WAVES International, along with wider Association for Vedic Studies that is known as WAVES India. So WAVES International and WAVES India are multidisciplinary academic organizations renowned for providing scholarly forums to facilitate productive discussion and research on Vedic traditions. This WAVES webinar series explores Vedic knowledge through the various scholars and researchers and their thought-provoking writings. On that note, on behalf of WAVES, I, Dr. Aparna Dheer, Secretary WAVES India, NS, and also Associate Board Member WAVES International, welcome everyone attending along with our eminent guest of today's program. Today, we are delighted to have among us the renowned speaker, Dr. David Scharf. He is a professor and chair of the physics department at Maharishi International University, also known as MIU, with a PhD from Johns Hopkins University, known for his interdisciplinary approach. He has previously held faculty roles at University of Rochester, Northeastern University, Wentworth Institute of Technology. His scholarly work explores the intersections of quantum field theory and consciousness, aiming to explore the limits of space, time, matter, and causation in the context of consciousness-based understanding of reality. He is also the co-principal investigator on MIU's Dark Matter Research Project. Today, he will be speaking on the topic Consciousness and Quantum Field Theory, Bridging Science, Philosophy, and the Vedic Perspective. His talk will be focused on his talk will be focused to explore the profound interplay between the consciousness and the physical universe, presenting a paradigm in which consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but the very foundation of all existence. Drawing on ancient Vedic insights and modern developments in quantum physics, he will challenge the dominant materialistic worldview and examine how subtle domains, infused with meaning, purpose, and intelligence, underlie the manifest world. This lecture allows us to delve into how advanced physics, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and string theory offers glimpse into deeper layers of reality, including the mind-body connection and the role of prana, that is the life force, in promoting physiological health and resilience. These insights suggest that consciousness is not only central to understanding the cosmos, but essential for addressing the urgent challenges facing humanity today. So we are very looking forward to the today's talk. And before that, I would like to just mention that we will have a QA session in the end of this talk, but with raise hand options. And also you can write your questions in the chat box. With this note, I welcome Dr. David G for his talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deer. Okay, so should I share screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Yep, share screen. Okay, and let's see. Okay. So I'm chairman of the physics department at Maharishi International University. And I have been a longtime participant in the WAVES conferences, which have always been enriching. The title of my talk today is Consciousness and Quantum Physics, Bridging Science, Philosophy, and Vedic Perspectives. For centuries, physics has operated under the assumption, born of pragmatic decisions in the 17th century. The 17th century is when modern science in the West was just getting started, and the great geniuses like Galileo and Rene Descartes were they were being censored by the prevailing religious authorities at that time, and they made a pragmatic decision to separate the world of consciousness and mind from the world of matter in order to allow physical science, physics, and the other physical sciences to progress unimpeded. And that pragmatic decision was useful at the time, and it allowed for a great deal of progress in science. So they proposed that consciousness and mind are irrelevant to understanding the material world. This assumption gradually hardened into a full-blown materialism, which holds that matter is primary and consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity. While this view enabled remarkable progress in science, it has now become a limiting paradigm. Theoretical physics has seen no major breakthroughs in over half a century since the discovery of the strong force quarks and gluons in the early 1970s. So since then, there hasn't been a major breakthrough in theoretical physics. And the materialist framework is beginning to crack under the weight of its own anomalies. There's an accumulation of anomalies that are hard to explain. The materialist paradigm, the foundations, the pillars of the materialist paradigm are space, time, matter, causation, as we ordinarily understand it. And there have been anomalies, even in the 19th century, even in the 18th century. The reformulation of classical mechanics from the Newtonian force at a localized point model to a more holistic model, the principle of least time, the principle of least action, suggests that there are holistic features affecting physical phenomena, which are hard to explain in terms of a strictly materialist framework. And the materialists and the mechanistic approach to science was competing with this idea that there are global balancing principles, is the term that I came up with. And I've seen a similar term in mainstream philosophy of science called adynamical, meaning not strictly mechanistic forces, adynamical global constraints. There seems to be a recognition that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that there are some effects from wholeness. And that seems to be pointing more in the level of some sort of subtler dynamics, the realms that we usually think of as mind, intellect, ego. And perhaps the most expressed level of the subtle domain would be prana, the life force. And prana seems to give an integrity to an organism, which is hard to explain in strictly mechanistic causal vocabulary. So non-locality and quantum entanglement, everybody has heard about. Quantum entanglement is when particles have interacted and then are separated, and yet they still are entangled. If you make a measurement on one of the particles and collapse its wave function, you automatically collapse the wave function of its partner, no matter how far away it was. And this, Einstein first actually realized that quantum mechanics commits you to long distance entanglement. He called it spooky action at a distance. He didn't like it. And for a long time, there was a debate between the leaders of quantum physics and Einstein. And the mainstream community thought, okay, this is just a debate that's philosophical and can't be resolved, but it has been resolved. And quantum mechanics has been vindicated, and Einstein's hidden variables theory, local hidden variables theories, have been shown to be not tenable. Also, retrocausality, causality backwards in time. Um, One of my colleagues, Park Hensley, reminded me that Maharishi talks about the particles of mind as being a finer kind of substance than the material particles, the particles of the physical domain. And they actually travel faster than light. Traveling faster than light means backwards in time. They send signals backwards in time, which makes sense from the perspective of our experience of mind. We think of purposes in the future having an effect on us, that there seems to be some kind of a signal backwards in time. In fact, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi really liked this quote from Michelangelo, the great Italian sculptor in the Renaissance. He said that the statue already existed in the block of marble, and all Michelangelo was doing was chipping away the excess deposits to reveal what was already there. And I think that's the case for all action which is consistent, in tune with cosmic purpose. When we're functioning at our best, we're bringing about what in some sense is already there. That involves, from the physics perspective, that involves a signal going backwards in time. Now, in 19th century physics, electromagnetism, James Clerk Maxwell formulated what have come to be known as Maxwell's equations, and all of electricity and magnetism can be explained in terms of Maxwell's equations. Now, they're formulated in terms of the electric force, E, and what's called the magnetic force, B, the electric and magnetic fields. And it was realized pretty early on that there's a more elegant, more powerful formulation in terms of the electric and magnetic potentials. Now, the problem is that one of those potentials, called the advanced potential, sends a signal backwards in time. It's retrocausation. How is that possible? Well, the 19th century scientists said, no problem, it's just mathematical fancy footwork. What's real are the electric and magnetic fields. And that's the way science viewed these advanced potentials, which involve signaling backwards in time. But then in the 1950s, Yakir Aharonov, an Israeli scientist, and David Bohm, an American scientist, actually his mentor and thesis advisor, collaborated, and using the insights from quantum physics, they showed that if you take a beam of particles, and there can be regions of space outside of a solenoid. I won't go into what a solenoid is, but it creates regions of space where the electric and magnetic fields are both zero. And yet the magnetic and electric potentials are varying. So if you split a beam of charged particles and they go through different regions where the electric and magnetic potentials are different, and then recombine them, since the different potentials will affect the phase of the particles differently, they will get out of phase And when you recombine them, you'll see an interference pattern, which shows that the potentials have their own reality, even when the electric and magnetic fields are zero. Now that's stunning. And in a mainstream electromagnetism textbook, they will acknowledge this, usually in a footnote, and say, we don't know what to make of this. This is a problem for physics. It's an anomaly. And these anomalies are accumulating. In more advanced physics, in quantum field theory, there's something called virtual particles, and they involve particles traveling backwards in time. They involve negative energy, negative mass. You can have a particle going in one direction and its momentum going in the opposite direction. All these are anomalies which are hard to square with the materialist understanding. It suggests that materialism may not be the whole story. In fact, it may just be the tip of the iceberg. And what's real is the whole subtle domain and the transcendental domain, which is pure consciousness in its totality. It's Brahman, and this pure consciousness underlies and is much deeper and much more powerful than the material domain. These adynamical, they're not mechanistic forces in the Newtonian mechanics sense. These adynamical phenomena hint at a subtler layer of reality, what the Vedic tradition calls the subtle domain, whose most accessible expression is prana, the life force. So the subtle realm would be mind, intellect, ego, but also prana, the life force, and that may be most accessible to physics. Prana acts as a global constraint on the coherence and resilience of living systems. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. It's not just parts interacting according to chemical and physical exchanges of energy. There's some holistic, non-local, adynamical global constraints that hold the system together and make it living, give it life and health. To move forward, science needs a new paradigm, one that recognizes consciousness not as a passive epiphenomenon. Epiphenomenon means passive byproduct, but as the fundamental ground of reality. This emerging view holds promise not only for theoretical physics, but also for experimental discovery, particularly in the frontier fields of biophysics and subtle energy research. I'm predicting that these high energy particle accelerators, which are at the basis of contemporary advanced experimental physics, are going to be phased out. They cost tens of billions of dollars. They are too expensive, and the experimental results they're yielding are getting less and less important. They're getting less information for more money, and the science is going to turn away from high energy physics as the frontier of physics. Now, I want to step back. Here's a story from the Katha Upanishad. Here's Yama, the great god of death and immortality, and Nachiketas, who was a young boy, about 12 years old, who came to visit Yama. And the story is interesting. Nachiketas' father was conducting ceremonies and sacrifices to propitiate the gods. And Nachiketas noticed that he was being stingy. He was using the rotten leftovers instead of the really good stuff. And so he kind of, to nudge his father, he said, "Father, to whom will you offer me?" And his father immediately got the point, and he flew into a rage, and he said, well, translated in modern American vernacular, it would be "go to hell," but he said, "Go to Yama." And Nachiketas, being a dutiful young boy, packed up a little satchel, and so he went looking for Yama. He heard that Yama was in the south of India, so he headed in that direction. And sure enough, after several months of traveling, he arrived at Yama's doorstep. He knocked on the door, and um, the butler came to the door and said, "What do you want?" And he said, I want to speak to Yama." And the butler said, "Oh, well, he's not home right now. You'll have to wait." So Nachiketus waited on Yama's doorstep for 3 days. And then he saw Yama coming riding on a water buffalo, which was his preferred mode of transportation. And when Yama came and saw Nachiketus, he said, "What are you doing sitting here?" And Yama told him, and he said, "Oh my, that is not very hospitable. I will have to tell my staff that they have to be more gracious to visitors. I am so embarrassed. Nachiketus, I'll give you 3 wishes, anything you want, and I'll try to fulfill them." So Nachiketa said, "Okay, my first wish will be that when I go home, I will be reconciled with my father." And Yama said, "Okay, done. When you go home, your father will be so happy to see you, and everything will be fine. What's your second wish?" And Nachiketa said, "I heard the fire ceremony is very good for enlightenment in evolution. Could you teach me the fire ceremony?" And Maharishi taught all of his TM teachers the puja, which we say to Guru Dev before we teach somebody TM. So Yama taught Nachiketas the fire ceremony. And then he said, "What is your third wish?" And Nachiketa said, "Well, I have wondered what happens when the physical body dies. Is that all there is? We just are spread into the wind like dust, and that's the end? Or is it? Well, I've heard stories that there is more to the soul or the jiva that goes on." And Yama said, "Oh, this is a very deep, subtle question. Even the wise um, are wondering about this. Why don't you have another wish? You can have a beautiful wife, or you can have a big fortune, or um, many beautiful wives." But Nachiketa said, "No, no, no, this is really what I want to know." So Yama was stuck. He had to tell him. And we don't know, maybe some Vedic scholars who are on this webinar know better than me. But as far as I know, we don't know exactly what Yama told Nachiketas. But I'm imagining that in contemporary scientific language, he would tell the story like this. Okay, in the West, the history of psyche and soul. Psyche, the term comes from breath, the principle of life. Compare this to the Vedic principle of prana, the life force, or soul. That comes from the Old English, sawa or sawo, the intellectual or immortal principle in a person. And the corresponding Vedic concepts, jiva is the individual soul that animates a living being. Jiva is a reflection or manifestation of Atman. Atman is the universal, eternal, and unchanging self or soul, beyond the limitations of time, space, and causality. And Brahman is the totality, the ultimate reality underlying all that there is. And there's a chariot metaphor. Here is Krishna is the charioteer, and Arjuna was the warrior in the chariot. And the chariot represents the body. The driver is the intellect, the reins are the mind, and the horses are the senses. You'll notice that there are only 4 horses in this artist's rendition. He took artistic license because there are 5 senses and organs of action. Now, the gross physical level, what we call matter, would just be the tip of the iceberg. And then the subtle domain would be intermediate between the gross physical and the transcendental level. And I've drawn them not to scale. I actually think the gross physical level is just a minute tip of the iceberg. The layers of the subtle body, this is from Taittiriya Upanishad, the 5 sheets surrounding Atma. Annamaya kosha is the food body. We have the dining hall here at Maharishi International University is called Annapurna, which means literally full of food. Annamaya kosha is the gross physical body. Prana is the most expressed level of the subtle body. It's closest to the material domain. And there, I think the interaction between subtle energy and physical matter will be most accessible to science in its current form. Manamaya kosha is mind, Vijnanamaya kosha is the intellect, subtler than the mind, and Anandamaya kosha is bliss, it's the ego, which when it's healthy is a source of bliss. Now Maharishi said, he talked about samadhi, transcending. When we practice the meditation that he taught us, transcendental meditation, we transcend the thoughts, the thinking mind, to the level of Atma, pure consciousness. And this transcendental consciousness, or samadhi, Maharishi wrote, I was thrilled when I read this in Gaudapada's Karaka, Gaudapada's commentary, so many years ago, that the mind in samadhi does not get extinct, it expands. Gaudapacharya says in his commentary on Mandukya Upanishad, Pracharasatu Vigyaya, the mind in samadhi expands, and thereby he establishes Brahmi consciousness, Brahmi Chaitana, not a state of transcendence, really. In a sense, although that was the word Maharishi chose, transcendence could be misinterpreted to mean gets lost, gets extinct, gets annihilated. It's not that. It's an expansion, thereby implying the practicality of action and behavior and experience, very thorough and most profound in that state of Brahman consciousness where the mind is expanded. It doesn't get extinct, it gets expanded. The jiva becomes Brahm. It doesn't mean the jiva gets lost and extinct, but it only expands. It's the expansion of individuality which is desired of the state of Vedanta. So here are some philosophical perspectives. This is Plato on reincarnation and innate knowledge. Someone would not seek what he knows, for since he knows it, there is no need of the inquiry, nor what he does not know, for in that case, he does not even know what he is looking for. Thus, the soul, since it is immortal and has been born many times and has seen all things both here and in the other world, has learned everything that is. So we need not be surprised if it can recall the knowledge of virtue or anything else which it once possessed, for seeking and learning are in fact nothing but recollection. So Plato is suggesting that we have all knowledge within ourselves. And when we're doing science, we're not so much discovering new knowledge out there as we're getting more clear about the principles that are already inherent deep in our own consciousness. And then Plato says in the Phaedo, which is his book about death, I suppose the soul reasons most beautifully when none of these things give her pain, neither hearing nor sight nor grief nor any pleasure, when instead bidding farewell to the body, she comes to be herself, all by herself, as much as possible, and when doing everything she can to avoid communing with or even being in touch with the body. So from Plato's perspective, contra the materialists, the body or the brain doesn't produce consciousness. If anything, it's a distraction. The body is about survival, and the gross level of our thinking is fear and anxiety and uh, those kinds of things which disturb the deeper intuition. Okay, now let's look at the materialist perspective. Here's a visual graphic. We have here's the story the materialist tells. You have a source of light, say the sun. The light shines on the object of perception, in this case, the flower. It gets deflected into the eye of the observer, here this young lady, and it's we can fill in the neurophysiological story. It stimulates the retina at the back of the eye, and the rods and cones send signal down the optic nerve, and the optic nerve ends up at the visual cortex, which is at the back of the head. And there are 25 layers to the visual cortex, and an image is created. And here, all of this you can find in any standard neuroscience text. And here the story gets a little vague. Somehow that produces a representation of the object, in this case the flower, in the mind of the observer. How does that happen? The materialist story is a little short on that. All right, now there are a lot of bad ideas out there. Here's a guy with a bad idea, poor guy. And materialism is one of the worst. Now, Plato was aware of materialism. Here is he, for the sake of argument, he's giving the materialist doctrine. The body is held together at a certain tension between the extremes of hot and cold and wet and dry and so on, and our soul is a temperament or adjustment of these same extremes when they are combined in just the right proportion. Well, if the soul is really an adjustment, obviously as soon as the tension of our body is lowered or increased beyond the proper point, the soul must be destroyed, divine though it is, just like any other adjustment, either in music or in any product of the arts and crafts, although in each case the physical remains last considerably longer until they are burnt up or rot away. So Plato was not a materialist, but he was very aware of the materialist picture. And here he gives a description. It's like a musical instrument that's tuned in just the right proportion, and that produces consciousness and cognition. That's the materialist point of view. Here's a more modern expression. This is by a famous contemporary philosopher named Daniel Dennett. He wrote a book called Consciousness Explained. He might have better entitled his book Consciousness Explained Away. The prevailing wisdom, variously expressed and argued for, is materialism. There is only one sort of stuff, namely matter, the physical stuff of physics, chemistry, and physiology, and the mind is somehow nothing but a physical phenomenon. In short, the mind is the brain, According to materialists, we can, in principle, account for every mental phenomenon using the same physical principles, laws, and raw materials that suffice to explain radioactivity, continental drift, photosynthesis, reproduction, nutrition, and growth. This is the materialist. Note that he says, in principle, science is nowhere near explaining consciousness and cognition. They're making a promise that someday, using these same old physical principles and laws and raw materials, someday we'll be able to explain consciousness and cognition. The general idea, here's Jaguan Kim, is that because each of us has a soul, so now he's making fun of the alternative to materialism. The general idea is that because each of us has a soul, we are the kind of conscious, intelligent, and rational creature we are. Strictly speaking, we do not really have souls, since we are, in an important sense, identical with our souls. That is, each of us is a soul. My soul is the thing that I am. Each of us has a mind, therefore, because each of us is a mind. And here's his conclusion. All that is probably a bit too speculative, if not totally fantastical, for most of us to swallow. And here's Owen Flanagan, The Problem of the Soul. Flanagan says the mind or the soul is the brain, or better, consciousness, cognition, and volition are perfectly natural capacities of fully embodied creatures engaged in complex commerce with the natural and social environments. Humans possess no special capacities, no extra ingredients that could conceivably do the work of the mind, the soul, or free will as traditionally conceived. Here's my comment. Note that the materialist is assuming that the physical domain is causally closed, that the mind or the soul is not a subtler phenomenon that then interacts with the gross physical body. But this is a metaphysical add-on. It's not science. The materialist claims to be speaking from the point of view of science, but he's gone beyond science. In fact, materialism has become a quasi-religion. Now, here's David Chalmers, The Hard Problem of Consciousness. David Chalmers noted that even if neuroscience fulfills the promise that these materialists have in mind, and someday it can account for every single neuron in the brain and how it interacts with the other neurons in the muscles in the body, and can explain all of our movements as if we're complex robots. David Chalmers noted that there's still a hard problem. The neuroscientists still won't explain why we have subjective experience at all. That's the hard problem. Now, I'm going to present a harder problem, and I know Aparna said I only have 3 hours, so I'll have to go through this very quickly. Was that right, Aparna? I have 3 hours to present?
No, sir.
Oh,
Just few minutes. You can take 10 more minutes. Then
okay.
we will have a QA session.
Oh, so the situation is more dire than I realized. Okay, I will hurry. We cannot possibly conceive. Okay, now I came across this argument when I was an undergraduate studying Kant, Immanuel Kant, the great 18th century German philosopher. Kant realized, this is in a footnote. Lailan Prasad raised his hand. Dr. Prasad, did you have a question?
We will take questions afterwards, sir, after 10 minutes.
Okay.
You can
Okay.
proceed with the presentation.
Okay. So Kant noticed we cannot possibly conceive of a reason meaning us, a human being, a jiva, a soul, somebody capable of cognition, as being consciously directed from outside in regard to its judgments. In other words, its judgments, its thoughts, its conclusions. If we were conscious of being that we're directed from outside, if we came to believe, like the materialist, that our cognition is a passive byproduct of something else, neurons firing in the brain, then the subject would attribute the determination of his power of judgment not to his reason, but to an impulsion. It would seem as if he were being controlled to think the way he does, and he wouldn't be thinking because of some insight into rationality or truth. And Kant concluded, reason must look upon itself as the author of its own principles, independently of alien influences. This is the consciousness-based paradigm. Kant was having an insight into the deep principles underlying the Vedic conception. Oops. Now, William James emphasized an inconsistency with evolutionary theory of the materialist way of looking at things. He posited that if consciousness were merely a byproduct of neural processes devoid of efficacy, it would not have been favored by natural selection. In his 1879 essay, Are We Automata?, James wrote, automaton theory. In other words, James is considering the materialist idea. Maybe we're just complex robots. Automaton theory makes consciousness a mere supernumerary, a passive byproduct, as little able to affect the organism's destiny as the blush upon its cheek or the shadow cast by its form. James argued that if consciousness had no impact on behavior or any physical processes, then the contents of our consciousness, our awareness of the world, and our cognition would not have been shaped by evolution to correspond to reality. Consequently, the likelihood that our cognitive faculties reliably represent the world would be essentially zero. And here's the idea. The nervous system has evolved to support the organism's ability to survive and reproduce. If we're confronted with danger, we have to either fight or run away. Here's the guy running away. But the contents of our mind would be totally irrelevant on the materialist point of view because they don't do anything. They're just passive byproducts. In other words, we could be thinking in our mind about a flower. The nervous system has evolved to support the organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Whether our cognitions correspond to reality would be strictly a miracle. The nervous system has evolved to support the organism's ability to survive and reproduce, but the cognitive content of our thoughts is irrelevant. And the most important philosopher of religion in the West is Alvin Plantinga. And he wrote, and here's the question, what reason is there for supposing that the belief content is true on the materialist picture? There isn't any. The neurology causes adaptive behavior, running away or fighting, and also causes or determines belief content, but there's no reason to suppose that the belief content thus determined is true. All that's required for survival and fitness is that the neurology cause adaptive behavior. This neurology also determines belief content, but whether or not that content is true makes no difference to Darwinian fitness. Whoops. Materialism has undermined its own foundations. If the likelihood that our cognition makes any sense, is coherent, corresponds to reality, or is true, what does that do to science? There is no science. There is no rationality. the materialist undermines his own foundations. Materialism is intellectually bankrupt. Now, I'll leave with a concluding thought. Here, let's see, maybe I have. Materialism is conceptually incoherent. It's not just incorrect, it is fundamentally self contradictory. Okay, materialism is conceptually incoherent. It is fundamentally self contradictory. Attempting to explain consciousness through materialism is like trying to understand waves without recognizing the ocean that gives rise to them. Just as the ocean is the silent source of all its waves, the dynamic expressions of consciousness emerge from the unbounded, self interacting field of pure consciousness, the unified source of all knowledge and existence. So, my final thought for this lecture is if materialism is not true, which it's not, then there's a physics question. How does the mind or the soul interact with the brain and the body? There's an exchange of energy and information that science doesn't understand yet. And that is an exciting physics question. That's a question of prana. That's a question of how the mind interacts with the brain. There's a whole domain of subtle energy physics. And these anomalies, which are accumulating in mainstream physics, suggest that our understanding of space, time, matter, and causation are seriously incomplete. So there's philosophical work that needs to be done, there's scientific work that needs to be done, and Maharishi International University is playing an important role in this work. And I believe that the Waves community is playing an important role in this work. And it needs to be continued and enhanced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. David G. And as it is always said when we read Upanishad, it is always said that everything is pervaded with one sole existence. So this is what you have shown in your presentation, and that was a well blended presentation by you because it started with physics. And then there are a lot of examples, quotations from the Upanishads and the Vedic scriptures. You took the Bhagavad Gita also, and then you moved it to the philosophical part of consciousness. So I think because this our audience is having all the professors from the all the senior learned scholars from physics, philosophy, and Vedas, Vedic scriptures. So I believe there will be a lot more questions. So without wasting much time, I request all the listeners to either raise their hand or they can write in the chat box for their queries. Yes. I I'm having Dr. Rajkumar ji taking first question from Rajkumar ji. Yes, Rajkumar ji, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Scharf. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Raj.
I have one question about. Sorry, I was eating.
It's okay. Here, I'll drink my coffee too. So
Yeah.
we can be in tune.
So, consciousness, you were talking about consciousness, and I was reading about something about complexity theory, which defines the non-linear interaction between interconnected components. So in that components, you have a feedback loops, and then there are self-organization, and then there is emergent properties and all kind of things, right? So in consciousness, you saw those steps also to define consciousness as a complex complexity theory or nonlinear interactions.
Um, I think complexity theory is in its infancy, and it emerged from work in computer science, the hope that computers would get increasingly complex, and that would somehow explain consciousness and cognition. And I don't think it makes a fundamental dent in the argument that I just presented. It doesn't address it at all. That said, I think a consciousness-based, a Vedantic understanding of complexity theory might be an important contribution. So I think as a branch of mathematics and science, I think the work in complexity theory is valid. But basically, artificial intelligence is dead as a doornail. Artificial intelligence isn't going to explain consciousness. Consciousness doesn't need to be explained. Consciousness is the fundamental reality. What needs to be explained is how matter emerges.
Okay, so the attached question is that our conscious experience or our consciousness change with our feedback loop system or not?
There may be feedback loops and other more esoteric phenomena. That much is valid. That's real science. But to suggest that complexity built on a basically materialist foundation, to suggest that we're basically just fancy computers, that's not going to work.
What about just remove the complexity theory? Just the feedback loop system can be possible. There is a possibility of feedback loop system of for the consciousness or not?
I think self-referral is a term that Maharishi used quite a lot. And feedback loops may simulate self-referral, but self-referral is ultimately transcendental experience. It's completely self-sufficient. The mathematical descriptions will be partial expressions, in my view.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nice question.
I also request to all the listeners that if they have a query, may kindly keep it short so that we can take more queries. Now I request Dr. Lalan Prasad ji for his query.
Thank you, Professor David. It was a very illustrative and enlightening talk. And you have rightly said that materialism is self-contradictory.
Yeah.
And it is incoherent.
That's right.
This also means, in my opinion, that science is gradually moving towards spiritualism.
Yes.
And one example I can say that God particle theory, for instance, where something like that a superpower exists,
yeah.
Is being accepted by science, isn't so?
Science is, I think the physicists are the most expanded and open-minded of all the scientists, because they are realizing that their preconceptions about the physical world being self-contained and being fundamental, they have been their assumptions have been broken so many times. Einstein, relativity. In 1900,
Yes.
a famous classical physicist said, we pretty much know everything about the world. There's just a couple of clouds on the horizon. One of the clouds led to quantum mechanics, the other cloud led to relativity. So physicists have had their paradigms broken so many times that they have a little more humility than a lot of other scientific disciplines.
Thank you.
Now I again invite Dr. Gary G. Yes.
Thank you, David. That was brilliant talk.
Thank you.
Could you, I just got a little lost at the very end. Could you just explain in a sentence or two again why materialism is self-contradictory?
Yes. It's because if our cognition is a passive byproduct of neural processes in the brain, then if our cognition corresponded to reality, if our sense that we have a valid argument, if all that were determined by physical processes, it would be sheer accident if our cognition was true, if our arguments were valid. That means the materialist argument, the materialist thinks he's the embodiment of science and rationality. And here he has undermined the validity of cognition, of science and rationality. So he's undermining his own foundations.
If you assume that cognition is just a byproduct.
That's right.
I see.
That's right. So by assuming that cognition is just a byproduct of neural processes, which don't care whether our cognition is accurate, reliable, true, then that undermines the foundations of rationality. And the materialist, I gave you some examples, they are very arrogant. They think they are the embodiment of rationality. I didn't put some of their more nasty sneering at spirituality and religion and belief in a higher intelligence, but they are very confident that they're the epitome of rationality and science. And here they are undermining their own foundation. When I was in graduate school, I was studying philosophy, and they admired Bertrand Russell and all this analytical philosophy. And twice a year, I would go to the advanced TM teacher training courses that Maharishi hosted. And Maharishi would present the Vedic perspective. And I realized that Maharishi was much more rigorous than my professors at Johns Hopkins. Of course, when I came back and told this to my professors, it didn't make me popular, but that was my realization.
Thank you.
Yes, now I'm reading one question from the chat. Dr. Dr. David, that are you acquainted with the Yogachar school of Buddhist?
No, I'd be delighted to hear about it.
And this question is by Jadu Singh Ji. If he's here, he can explain more.
Okay.
Yes, he's here. So I'm putting on spotlight. So you want to explain your question? If okay. So I'm taking next question then. I welcome Dr. Tushar Mukherjee ji. Oh, I think he wants to say something.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Jadu Singh ji, do you want to say
Yes.
about your? Yes. Okay.
Hello, Dr. Scharf.
Yes.
Well, thank you for a very brilliant presentation. Um, uh, Also encompassing Western philosophy, Kant and James and so forth. That's a field I'm very interested in. I've actually written on it myself. I wonder if you're acquainted with the Yogacara school of Buddhism and its tenet of Chittamatra or consciousness only. Are you acquainted with that school of?
No, but it sounds like I would be amenable to it. I'm of the belief that consciousness is not only primary, but consciousness is all there is.
Right, right. Well, y- well, uh, it might be of interest to you because the quantum perspective and the primacy of consciousness
Yeah.
are both encompassed in that school of Buddhism.
Okay.
The writings of Vasubandhu and Asanga, especially, this is a great milestone in Indian philosophy, which also passed into Shankara Vedanta and other, uh, schools of Indian philosophy that prioritize consciousness. So that's just what I have to say. I just noticed that, uh, you know, uh, these tenets are you know, um, in symmetry with the Yogacara view.
Okay. We would love to have you come to Maharishi International University and speak on these ideas.
Oh, well, extend me an invitation, and I will be honored to come.
Thank you.
So now I invite Engineer Tushar Mukherjee ji for his question, if he's here. Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. It was a highly knowledge field, and I am thrilled to listen such a lecture from such a knowledgeable person. Actually, I am from engineering background,
Okay.
and quantum mechanics is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
So my question is this regarding entangled electrons. Suppose two quantum entangled electrons, they
Yeah.
are at far distance,
Yes.
but still they can communicate with each other.
Absolutely.
So whether it can also be termed as a sort of consciousness?
Yes. Well, I think non-locality is a characteristic of consciousness. It means that consciousness is more fundamental than space and time. Yeah. So yes, I'm agreeing. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Now, again, next I invite Miss Aparna Sharma ji.
I'm Aparna. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, Dr. David. My question, I have already typed it. I just wanted to repeat the same. Since the consciousness is a drop in the ocean that we are talking today, and it's very broad because I keep teaching consciousness and it's a very vast subject. Having said, is this the consciousness that we are talking today, is a science limiting the consciousness of Eastern philosophy, because the science has its own limitations in interpreting and translating the consciousness? And if so, how far we can go in terms of researching about this quantum physics and consciousness?
Good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you.
It's what our physics program at MIU is all about. And you're right. I think that physics can scratch the surface of these subtler levels. Whether how deep mathematical physics can go, I'm not sure. Right now, we're seeing cracks in the foundations of the materialist paradigm from within science itself. This idea that there are particles going backwards in time, that space, time, matter, and causation, which are the pillars of materialism, they don't seem to be fundamental. What's fundamental is intelligence. And I do think that science can do a lot, and I think it's important that these breakthroughs happen. In Ayurveda, for example, the Ayurvedic Vaidya, he or she has a lot of herbs and remedies and so on, but it's also the Vaidya works on a holistic level and is healing the prana, which may be even more important. So how these work and what the implications are, we're only just beginning to scratch the surface. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. David.
Okay, again, now I invite Dr. Ashalata Pandeyji. Okay.
Good evening, Dr. Scharf. I'm not a science person, so many things I don't follow very easily. My simple question is, where exactly does consciousness reside, mind or heart? What do you think? How? And the second question is, how does one manage conflict in consciousness?
Okay. So the first question, my understanding is the Vedanta perspective that consciousness is all there is. So I wouldn't say it resides somewhere. It's everywhere. It's everything. But as it expresses itself in terms of our individual jiva, in terms of our life here on earth as human beings, there are subtler levels of the mind, our intuition, which we call the heart, which I would say is more fundamental than the intellect and the mind, which are there. The mind is cluttered with signals from the body, and the body isn't necessarily about love and truth and deep understanding. The body is about survival. And so we get impacted with anxiety and stress of all kinds, fear, and that clouds our ability to hear the heart, the subtler signals. And as we evolve, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who is my guru and the guru of Maharishi International University, he explained that as you dip into the transcendent, as you experience samadhi over and over again, you become more attuned to those finer levels, that finer feeling, the heart value, those signals of love. And that might be the answer to your second question, too. How do you transcend conflict? It's through love. And I think that this Vedic perspective, and why I am so excited about the work the World Association for Vedic Studies is doing, is because the world is in a precarious place, and the forces of real darkness. I mean, we're seeing behaviors of terrorism that are really darker than hard to imagine. And the solution has to come from coherence of the decent people of the world. And I think if there were coherence among in the civilized world, those terrorists couldn't last for 2 months. It's our own incoherence that's allowing that to gain traction. So I apologize for the political commentary. I'll stay to science from now on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. The session is getting more and more interesting, and we are still having 3 more questions. So I hope the speaker won't mind if we take all questions.
Sure.
Thanks. So now I invite Mr. Syagnik Banerjee ji. He's member board of board of directors, Waves International, for his question.
Thank you, Ash. Thank you, Aparnaji. So, Dr. Scharf, thank you for the great presentation. I look at consciousness from a behavioral perspective. So, my question is, does consciousness exist in different levels? And the reason I'm asking is if it has higher and medium, moderate, or lower levels of consciousness, would a collection of individuals create their own subdomain of consciousness, or is that something merely superficial?
Absolutely. There's collective consciousness. A group, a city, a nation, they all have their collective consciousness, and it can be higher or lower. So I absolutely think that is the case. The materialist has an impossible problem. David Chalmers, the philosopher of mind, who coined the term hard problem of consciousness, the problem for materialism of how to explain consciousness is not just a hard problem, it's an impossible problem. They can't do it. Now, those of us who subscribe to the Vedanta perspective, the Vedic perspective that consciousness is all there is, we have an explanatory problem also. Why aren't we God? Why don't we know everything? Why can't we? And that is a problem which can be explained, and Vedic science is all about the levels of expression and from that totality. But the final answer is, well, if you want to know the truth, we are God, we are Brahman, although we may not remember it, and that is limiting our capabilities. There's a joke which I hope you enjoy. There's a guy who dies and he goes to heaven, and he's waiting at the gate, and the gatekeeper comes with his clipboard checking everybody in. So the guy says, I need to have a word with God. I'm not happy with the way he did things down there. So the gatekeeper says, God is awfully busy. I don't think he has time for this, but I'll check. He comes back and says, you're in luck. There was a cancellation. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead and make it quick. So he goes in and he says to God, God, here you are, all good and all powerful, but the world is a mess. There's so much suffering. Why didn't you do something? And God said, I did do something. I sent you down there. So I think that's actually the truth. We are divine beings, and we have a purpose on earth.
The delegation is real.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Yes. So again, we have 3 questions in the chat. Now I'm taking the question from Benjamin G. He's saying that is the material world just a vivid dream that follows the law of physics? In other words, there is nothing other than our awareness of it.
I think the Vedic scholars on this webinar could probably give a better answer than me, but I'll tell you my feeling. I think yes and no. Yes, it's a mirage in the sense of it's a Maya, but you, you'd better look both ways before you cross the street.
Thank you.
And thank
You're on mute.
Yes, yeah, got it. So another question is from our associate board member, Waves International, Dr. Ashutosh Parikji. He said, in the story of Nachiketa from the Kathopanishad, he seeks the truth about life and death from Yama, the
Yes.
god of death. If we consider Nachiketa as a symbol of particle traveling through time and space in search of knowledge, what principle of physics could best represent his unwavering path toward truth, unaffected by material distractions?
I think the closest physics has come is this non-locality and entanglement. Nachiketas was obviously a very highly evolved young man, and on that level, we're not talking about mechanistic physics, a force located at a point and step by step following the particles. The holistic features of physics come into play. The most important one that we physicists are aware of is entanglement, but there are lots of hints of non-locality elsewhere in physics as well. It's a rich subject and needs
Yes.
a lot of work, actually.
Yes. And the last question I'm taking, I think this is going to be the last one, from Dr. D. Pramoji. He's member Waves India. He said, can we measure the spiritual energy in any form?
Yes. Let's see. I will show you. Am I still able to share here? Let me see if I can find this very quickly. Okay, here. This is my colleague, Dr. Fred Travis. Each of these dots represents a person, a subject in his study. And he was studying the first level of enlightenment, as Maharishi described it, called cosmic consciousness, where transcendental experience is maintained along with waking state. That's the first level of enlightenment. And then there's something called God consciousness. And then, of course, Brahmi Chaitanya, Brahman consciousness is the highest level. But even this first level, he divided the participants according to their subjective descriptions into those who rarely or never had transcendental experience along with waking state, those who occasionally did, and those who had continuous experience. In other words, they were in what Maharishi called cosmic consciousness, the first stage of enlightenment. And then he had some z-scores. This was an integration scale based on EEG. And there were three components to these z-scores. F3, when they put on this cap and measure EEG when somebody's meditating or even just sitting there, each of the electrodes, they have 32 electrodes, each one has a label. It's like a map. F3, F4 is frontal lobe, broadband EEG coherence. The second is global simple choice contingent negative variation scores, and the third is global EEG amplitude. And I'll just mention the second one, contingent negative variation. That is when a subject is sitting at a computer he gets a signal, and then a second later, he gets a choice. Is this number bigger than this number, or the one on the left is bigger than the right? And he has to press a button, so he has to make a decision. Now, in that space between the warning and the actual choice he has to make, they measure the variation. And for somebody who is in a lower state of consciousness, they get very excited. And if they're in a higher state of consciousness, then there's a negative variation. The EEG becomes very settled suddenly. And that negative variation, to my mind, is what James called the transmission model. The brain is getting out of the way and higher consciousness can flood in. So you get ready and you make the right decision. Now, these EEG measures are correlated with subjective experience. This is powerful science. This is the science of measuring higher states of consciousness by the brain. In some case, the brain getting out of the way, the brain getting out of the way so higher consciousness can flow in.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you, doctor, for giving the good information. I'm working on the soul and body as per Bhagavad Gita. So the soul needs a body and body needs a soul. So on the basis of that, I'm thinking of how to calculate the spiritual energy. That's what. Thanks for your comment. I'll be in touch with you, doctor.
Okay. Enjoy it. Yeah, I'll enjoy it.
Yes. So now we are over with all the questions, I feel, and there are a lot of other comments we found in the chat. Everybody liked the presentation and they are happy of getting so much information through this just one presentation. And now I would like to invite Dr. Shashi Tiwari ma'am, President Waves India, and also member Board of Directors Waves International for a few comments and observations if she wants to make. You're muted, ma'am.
Yeah, now.
Yes.
So we were listening a great talk by Professor David Scharf, a friend of Waves, I can say like that, a great philosopher, a thinker, a researcher, and overall a great professor. And you will be here, this is webinar number 17, and most of the persons are related with Waves. They are members of Waves, or they are just coming and having their interest in all these subjects. So they are here. So I wish to say about David Shaw first, because I know him from the last 12 or 13 or 15 years. When in 2014, we were in Fairfield at Maharshi National University. I think now its name is changed. Some part of name. International is added there. I think so. In the university name. And we were having our conference, a Waves International Conference. Waves India and Waves USA both were joining in that conference. And it was a great conference. And I think you must be knowing that this year also, the next year, we are again planning to come to Fairfield like that.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. So this is, and you have attended 4 or 5 conferences, I think so.
More than that, yes.
And moreover, he is a board member of International Waves from the last 7 or 8 years. And now again he is in the board. So, and I think Peter is also here. Peter is Scharf. I have seen.
My brother?
So
yes, he's here.
Brother.
Okay.
He is professor also in the university. and he was co-coordinator at that time when we were having our conference there. So all these are our relations with Dr. Scharf, and I was very much afraid that you will be speaking science and how I will be able to understand. But it was an amazing lecture, and it was very clear, very interesting, and moreover, you have taken a broad area of your philosophy, as starting from Indian philosophy, ancient Vedic philosophy. You went to the Western philosopher, 17th century onward, and almost all philosophers you have referred, and the main subject which are nowadays under research, he has mentioned that also. And the most popular subject, which is for the philosophy nowadays, I have seen that is consciousness. And even then, they are not able to reply very properly, I think so. Consciousness is, according to Indian philosophy, according to Vedic philosophy, Jagrata, Swapna, Shushupta, and Turiya. So that is fourth state, and that is transcendental state, and then consciousness is merged in the soul. So probably to understand our our soul, our individual soul, that concept of consciousness is nearer to the awareness of our present awareness. We can feel our consciousness. So through that we can understand what is our soul, and most of the Indian philosophy systems, you know, and we all know that they all believe in non-dualistic system of philosophy, in the Vedanta especially. And there again, you have very well said that Jivo, individual soul is Jiva, and Brahma is a universal soul. So that prakarana of Kathopanishad was very nice, and Shreyascha, Preyascha, दोनों उसके पास आते हैं, and then he decided that no, I will choose Shreyas, because both are giving some result. Shreyas is giving liberation, and Preyas is giving word. So word about materialism, you have said wonderful things. No one can know. Material word cannot be known by mind or by soul. This is true. But I was not able to understand. There are four things: body, mind, intellect, and soul. Then where is consciousness? That should be in between, and then that is actually the soul. Consciousness is actually the soul, and when it is individual soul, then it is consciousness. So Indian philosophy is very clear, and I feel that, as Professor Lalan Prasad ji has said, that nowadays science is going towards spirituality. Spirituality is going towards science.
Yes.
So both are researching for the same thing. They are establish what is truth. That is the goal of science. What is truth? They are researching for that. And the philosopher is also trying to find out what is truth, what is sat, what is reality. So absolute reality is again God. So it is a wonderful talk, I think, and that is why I am remembering all these things. Nowadays, I am working on Shiva Sutra, Dr. David Scharf, and you will be happy to know that because it is a later Shastra, it refers to sutras on Chaitanya Mahatma. That is very clear there. Chaitanya Mahatma. Consciousness is the soul. Clearly, he is saying consciousness is the soul. So thinkers are trying to get these questions solved. And there are so many seers, so many intellectuals in the world who have tried also. God particle is also there, something which I don't understand what is that. So I think you will be again available for us to invite you for a good lecture. And consciousness should be clear to us. What is that consciousness? So Aparna, thank you very much for giving me such time for saying few remarks about that. And the secondly, I am very happy to see the audience. Learned audience, we have all are very learned audience, very experienced, very knowledgeable. So questions, as you have seen the questions, there is no limit of time. What is time is going on, and secondly, interest is also there. So again, you have to come, no, without any doubt. Aparna, note down, and next year we will again call you. And that's all. Thanks to participants, thanks to organizers, thanks to talker, Professor David
Thank you.
Shropshire, and his brother Peter Shropshire. Thank you, thank you.
So now I thank Dr. Tiwari ma'am for concluding the whole session with her remarks. And as we have seen some few comments writing down there, and I hope you all have read those comments because it is a lengthy one again. So after the concluding remarks, we are not going to take all the comments, but the main thing is that today's talk was very insightful, as everybody is saying. But again, that is again a lot of an entanglement is there for us to explore further. With that note, I would like to conclude this evening here in India and afternoon there in US. And I personally and on behalf of Waves, I thank Dr. David for giving his valuable time and this valuable presentation, sharing his thoughts with us, and also enlighten us with lots of queries we have made. So thank you everyone, and also the members of Waves International, the Waves members of Waves India, and also the learned speakers from philosophy, Vedic studies, and physics, of course, and many other from the management side also, as we have Banerjee ji and Lalan ji with us, and many others like that. And from my institute as well, Dr. Rajkumar is from Institute of Advanced Sciences where I am working. So thanks everyone for this talk and for your presence. And now we will again meet in the month of July with another speaker. And
I say something. I'm seeing that one member from Canada is also there, and she is Sharmishtha Joshi. Then Mosmi Chatterjee, she is very regular, and she praiseworthy. Yeah, this is praiseworthy. So I interrupt in between.
Yes, that's so nice, ma'am, because I was thinking to take their names, and Dr. Mosmi Chattopadhyay ji is always there in all our webinar series, and naturally, and we have a good participation, one single participation from Canadian Hindu community, and that's again a good thing for us because.
Thank you, Shashi Madam. Thank you, Shashi Madam ji. And Aparna ji.
Ji, thank you. And with we had a lot of queries from Dr. Ashalata Pandey ji and others, and many others from Waves background, and of course, few of the members are from the Dr. David's Institute. We thank all of them who have joined. So thank you very much, and we will again meet in the month of July with another speaker and our talk number 18. Thank you, everyone, and namaste.